We're delighted to welcome to the RSA Michael Thompson, who is author of a new book, Organising and Disorganising, which is a fantastic book. And this is a new elaboration of a set of ideas which often go under the heading of cultural theory. Michael, in terms of the kind of four main categories of cultural theory, in addition to the category of hermit, but that things are complicated enough, the egalitarian, the individualistic, the hierarchical and the fatalistic. The thing that the book really brought home to me was the way in which each of those ways of viewing the world relies upon its antagonism, as it were, to the other ways of viewing the world in order to derive its energies. Tell us more about that.
Well, yes, that's the idea that each of them needs the others to define itself against, or to do things that are vital to its viability that it can't do itself. So markets, for instance, need some authority that's outside of the market to enforce the law of contract, because without the law of contract the markets would all fail. So that's the individualist solidarity, the market one. It has to have some authority outside, which we call the hierarchical solidarity. So those two obviously need one another. And that same principle goes on. The egalitarian solidarity really needs the markets and the hierarchies perpetrating all their dreadful inequalities and terrible things on Mother Nature, so as to have something to criticise. I mean, if those things weren't going on, you wouldn't be able to be outraged about the insults to Mother Nature and unsustainable. So they all need one another, even though they're kind of hell-bent, as it were, on getting rid of one another. The viability comes from the antagonism.
And I'm fascinated at the kind of that's why the fact that you will always have the hierarchical view of the world, the individualistic view of the world, the egalitarian view of the world, and the kind of background of the kind of fatalism is that. Well, that's why when one of those ways of viewing the world becomes kind of hegemonic, it will be criticised equally from both sides. So if you think of the kind of late 1960s and early 70s, the kind of hierarchism of the post-war era was challenged both by the egalitarianism of the kind of 60s hippie movement and then by kind of neoliberal market economics. Now, do you think we're approaching a similar time now because of the long wave of individualism, which feels like it's kind of crashed this summer, is now subject to a kind of quite powerful egalitarian critique from people who say all this wealth, markets never made us very happy and it was unsustainable. Mm-hmm. It's also subject to a hierarchical critique that says we need rules, we need regulation, we need global government.
Yes.
Is this a similar kind of moment, do you think?
It looks like it is, because what you describe, that wave, that long wave, it ended up really with one way of organising, the individualistic market way, pretty well completely driving out the other ways. And so you can reach that state of affairs, but of course you can't stabilise yourself there. Things aren't going to stay there. So the wave will break, but where, and then you start hearing the other voices again. They come sort of rushing in, as it were. But just where that will go is kind of, we're set for a lot of change, but the nature of the change, because it's complex, it's not deterministic. It's, if you only had markets and hierarchies, then if markets failed, hierarchies would come crashing in. But if the market ideology is failing now, thanks to having overreached itself, there are three competitors get in, and those complicated dynamics. But yes, I think it's change.
Now, one kind of criticism of cultural theory, because I use these ideas a lot in talks that I give, just did a talk this morning actually about public services using the cultural theory framework, is it can sound as though we're saying, well, they're questioning the notion of progress because we're saying actually these forces will never die, they'll always be in conflict. But of course, your view of the world contains within it advice for how, not for how you produce a solution, but for the context in which a solution is likely to emerge, or what you call a clumsy solution. And in the book, you give the fascinating example of Arsenal Football Club, as being a case of a clumsy solution.
Yeah.
Just tell us briefly why it is you think Arsenal relocated well, and what were the ingredients of that?
That's right. The idea is that no one of these four views of the world is going to get everything right all the time, but all of them are getting hold of something sensible, something valid. And so if you exclude one, or if you exclude two, or if you exclude three, then you're failing to pick up on all of the wisdom and experience that's built in, and energy and interaction. So when Arsenal wanted to expand, it's an individualistic market actor. It naturally approached the hierarchical actor, which was Islington Council, and said, give us outline planning permission to knock down these 2 streets of houses, and we'll expand our existing stadium, get 60,000 seat stadium. And that approach became public knowledge one day, and in less than 24 hours, the egalitarian organisation had come into existence.
Which is a residents' association.
Well, not just. It was very carefully called the Highbury Community Association.
Right.
Community is the word.
Yes,
a lot of them were residents, but a lot weren't.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were, they're careful to point out, were very loyal, keen Arsenal supporters.
Right.
So they were keen on Arsenal, they just were dead set against that particular solution.
And so having the hierarchical act of the local authority, the individualistic act of the football club, and the egalitarian act of the community allowed the emergence of what turned out to be an optimal solution, which was the Emirates Stadium. And had you not had that, you could have had the local authority solution, which might have been slow and cumbersome.
Yes.
Arsenal would have probably built would have had no care for the residents. The residents, if they'd had their way, would simply have blocked any development at all. So in this way, everybody got what they want because that space was created. So in a sense, the only advice one gives to policymakers is create the kind of framework in which all these different perspectives can be at play, and then you've got a better chance than if you assume simply a hierarchical or individualistic way of viewing the world.
That's right. What happened is that all three of the active voices got access. They were all all able to make themselves heard. Beyond that, then, having got access, each was required to be responsive to the other. There was a debate on television chaired by Anne Widdecombe, very well chaired, and there was lots of exchange back and forth. So the deliberative quality is very high, and if you ensure access to all the voices and ensure that they're responsive to one another, so that's right. You maximise the. That doesn't mean to say you will find, because there has to be a clumsy solution, as it were, out there. But if there is one, you stand a better chance of finding it if you've ensured access and responsiveness than if the whole thing's been tied up in a neater but less constructive interplay.
Great. Well, Michael, that's fantastic, and I can strongly recommend the book because it's not just the Arsenal example, but there's also your example of being part of Chris Bonington's mountaineering group, and it's a wonderful book. I'm looking forward to hearing you speak in a few minutes' time. Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.